The BRVM, the stock exchange in West Africa, was the top performing exchange on the continent last year. The index up by more than 12%. Jill Malandrino, VOA Channels TV correspondent in New York, starts there in New York with the chief executive, Edo Amenovo, to discuss the current economic state of the continent and how that regional market is attracting U.S. and Western investments.
The West African Regional Stock Exchange was the best performing exchange in Africa in 2015. Explain to us why it's been so successful.
Thank you. I think that there is three main reasons for that. The first one is the integration of our region. The BRVM is the only integrated stock exchange in the world, shared by many countries. The second reason, I think, is the performance of the economies of our state members during the last 5 to 3 years. The average GDP growth of the Union is about 6%, and we have in Ivory Coast and GDP growth about 9%. Right. So I think that this economic performance was favorable to the stock exchange. The last reason is the monetary stability of our Union. You know that the CFA is pegged to euro, so it's like a kind of protection for investment in our region.
What about weaning off of commodity dependency, though, because there has been a lot of growth and it lends to the GDP, but there's also a global slowdown in crude oil prices. Where else can the economy grow?
You know that the African countries, especially the Francophone countries in the West African Monetary Union, are not dependent on oil. We are most importers than exporters of oil, if we take the case of all these Francophone countries. So we are not affected by the decline in the oil price. Right. And one of the most important material we export also is the cocoa. You know that Ivory Coast is the first producer of cocoa in the world. So the price of cocoa is doing well during these last years, and this benefits to the Ivorian economy. Right. So we don't have the same effect of the decline in the oil price, in the raw material demand, in the demand coming from emerging countries like China, right, as we can have it in Nigeria, in Kenya, Angola, and so on.
I think having the currency stable, yes, is key as well, because we've seen the Nigerians suffering with the Naira, where it doesn't hold much value, so being pegged to the euro certainly has to lend to some credibility as well.
Yes, yes.
Right. Yes. How has the American investor responded to it? Are you seeing investment coming in through the Americans?
Yes, you know, on the BRVM, the first group of international investors is Americans. Mm-hmm. They account for 30% of the value traded in our market by foreign investors. That is very important. So we have a kind of dialogue with them to, first of all, update the information on the macroeconomic of our region. We also give them some information on what is going on the stock exchange and what are the outlook and the pipeline of IPO for the next years. We see a lot of interest, but they have some questions on 2 to 3 very important points for them. Right. The first one is the transparency of the market. Mm-hmm. They need more transparency in IPOs and so on. They also need to have more information disclosed by the listed companies, and we give them an assurance that we'll work on that very, very quickly. And finally, they need also to have more liquidity in our market. Right. They expect that the BRVM will increase the liquidity during the years. So we are working on that. I think that was very important point. And as stock exchange, you have to quickly handle these points and propose some solution to international investors.
Right. Well, that's something you can control too. You can't control economic growth, but you can certainly add liquidity. You can certainly make your issues more transparent. So the growth for the exchange is certainly there.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you very much for joining us in New York today.
Thank you very much.
For Channels TV in New York, I'm Jill Malandrino.
The International Energy Agency says unplanned disruption to oil production in countries like Canada, Nigeria, or Libya could help run down a global overhang of unused crude in 2016, while demand will profit from growing gasoline consumption. The IEA says output from non-OPEC producers is expected to fall by 800,000 barrels per day in 2016, and that's a jump from the agency's previous forecast for a drop of 710,000 barrels per day. On the demand side, the Paris-based IEA left its forecast for global demand growth broadly unchanged at 1.2 million barrels per day for this year, but said the risks to future forecasts lay to the upside. Meanwhile, about 400,000 barrels per day of Nigeria's crude oil has been shut in following Shell Petroleum's force majeure on its Bonny-Light exports. Shell says the force majeure is a result of a leak that led to the closure of the Nembe Creek trunk line for repairs. What are the implications of this? Let's get across to Adim Okwesa, who's a research analyst at financial derivatives company sitting here in Lagos. Adim, good afternoon. Thanks for coming through.
Good afternoon, Wilson. Thank you for having me.
How serious is the situation we have on our hands as far as the shut-ins are concerned? On one hand, the vandals having shut in some of these, then we have repairs that, has their maintenance or routine on the side of the oil majors.
Well, this is a huge setback for Nigeria's exports. With this, on the back of these rising militancy in this Niger Delta, it has huge implications for Nigeria. Considering that a benchmark production is 2.2 million barrels, it calls into question is this target realistic? Can we actually achieve 2.2 million barrels per day this year? And if that means we can't have these rising oil prices now. With oil prices at 48, that is actually good news for Nigeria. But if our production is still low, our production is about 1.6 now, and with this 400,000 barrels, with more attacks in the Niger Delta region, our production could plummet further. I remember in 2007 when a similar situation occurred with regards to Niger Delta militancy. Our production fell to as low as 1 million barrels. The prayer is that it doesn't reach that level.
And so, in other words, does this situation look like a reality check for what the International Energy Agency, the IEA, says that, look, towards some time down the line, we could see demand push and the fears around the glut in the market could disappear a little bit, moving prices higher. Do you agree? Do you think that happening on situations like this from Nigeria's end?
I do, but the market has been dictated by supply rather than demand. But now, as you approach summer months, as we approach hotter months in the northern hemisphere, in US, Europe, we should see higher demand for oil. So that should translate into higher oil prices. The market should rebalance eventually.
Okay, Adim. Okay, Adim Okwesa, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your comments there on the program today. Adim Okwesa, research analyst with Financial Derivatives Company. Let's take a break. We'll be back in 1 minute.